Hello, welcome to the Plunge Cast. Your hosts John Curzon, Chris Curzon, AJ Powell, and Mark Jordan. Today, the issue we're discussing is gun control. So we're going to go around the room and discuss our stance on gun control. Why don't we start with you, Chris?
Well, I am definitely against gun control.
How so?
Don't tread on my rights, because statistically speaking, it seems to not really make a difference in overall homicide rates if we take away guns or not.
Okay. What about you, AJ?
I am very pro gun control. I feel like we should do away with the Second Amendment, start over, and then we can put in place sensible gun laws, and people can use them for sport if they want, but decrease handgun violence across the nation.
Okay. How about you, Mark?
I'm with Chris on this one. Completely against gun control.
Okay. Well, as for my stance, I'm probably along the lines with AJ. I don't like the Second Amendment. I think it's just hindering us from implementing reasonable gun control. Although I would go so far as to have a UK-style gun control policy. No handguns, because I believe they're used in most crimes. Also, no assault rifles. I don't know the definition between assault rifle and assault weapon. I think there's a difference there, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
I think it's pretty much the same.
An assault rifle is a rifle, and an assault weapon can be a submachine gun.
Right. And as for hunting rifles and shotguns, I would allow them, but I emphasize their safe use and locked up. That's just an overview of our differences, I guess. So why don't we open this up to the floor? Chris, why don't we start with you? What facts and statistics do you have to support your argument, or your argument to support?
Well, you brought up the UK, so specifically speaking there, if you look at the overall homicide rate, it really didn't drop after, what was it, the 1997 ban of handguns. It actually started increasing. In fact, handgun violence started increasing. One of the journals I was reading earlier cited the fact that with more illegal handguns, people were trying to get more illegal handguns because they weren't legally able to get those, that the criminals were more willing to use them because they had a criminal intent somewhere along the line to use them.
Okay. Well, I have some statistics. They're not. I don't know. They happened after they have gun control policies in these countries. I chose several different countries with several different gun control policies, and I looked at three things: their homicide rate, suicide rate, and their unintentional shooting rates.
Okay.
This is going to be a little lengthy, so we'll try to make it quick. Australia, as we know, they have the gun buyback.
Okay.
I start with them. I'm just going to go alphabetical order through the countries I chose. Australia, their homicide rate is about 3 to every 100,000 people in the population. And again, I don't know if these dropped after the buybacks. I am aware that a lot of these gun control regulations were instituted in these countries as a result of mass shootings, which I have said before are pretty negligible, especially in this country, among the overall gun violence problem. Suicide rates, almost 3. It's 2.79 per 100,000, and unintentional is 0.64. And that's any time where, kids are playing with guns or a gun accidentally goes off when you're cleaning it. That would fall under manslaughter if they were charged. Oftentimes they're not prosecuted in this country, as far as I'm aware. Japan, homicides pretty much zero, near zero. Suicide rates pretty much near zero as well, 0.04. With guns, Chris.
Okay.
What I'm talking about, what I'm referring is gun violence specifically, not
Gotcha.
overall homicide or suicide or unintentional, but only gun use. I guess I should have emphasized that before. And their unintentional is 0.01. Mexico, I'm listing them because they do have gun control, but they have a high rate of homicides with gun use. So it's 10 to 100,000, which is pretty high compared to these other countries. That's even higher than us, guys.
Way higher than
They
us.
have
It's like double.
They have gun control policy. 0.69 for suicide and 0.47 unintentional. Now, I believe, and what a lot of people say, is that the guns are being brought in from other countries, mainly the United States, where it's easier to get. I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems reasonable to me if it's relatively easy to get guns here or in other countries with weak governments.
Definitely into Mexico. That's where all the guns come from, in Mexico.
Right.
Think about that. That's another dimension to the argument. I mean, really, we could, with more gun control in the United States, we could, decrease violence in other countries too.
Right.
Decrease violence or decrease gun violence?
Decrease gun violence, which I would say would most likely decrease violence overall.
I don't believe it.
Well,
I believe if somebody's going to be violent, they're going to be violent with or without guns.
Okay, we'll get back to that real quick. I just want to get through these statistics real quick.
All right.
Switzerland is another country I listed that I hesitated to list, but in all fairness, I think we should talk about them because they do have a high rate of gun ownership. But their homicide rate's really low. It's 0.52 per 100,000 with guns. Suicide is relatively high. It's 3.15 per 100,000 with guns. Unintentional is only 0.1. But they do have universal conscription. Everyone has to join, or at least all the men have to join the military for about a year and a half, I believe. So they learn how to use guns. They have a very strict gun culture. And even after shootings, they've talked about implementing gun control. But the government also has a tight regulation on the sale of guns. But almost everyone has a gun.
So if you're going to bring up Switzerland, you should also bring up Finland. They have a pretty loose gun policy there. They have a high gun ownership ratio, and they have almost next to no crime as well.
Okay, I was choosing one example of like what I see as across the board.
Oh.
In terms of...
Well, Finland should be on there then.
Okay, well, I was talking about Switzerland because they have high gun ownership but low crime or low gun violence.
All those nations over there do. Scandinavian nations.
Yeah, Mexico. So that's the example of Scandinavian nations. Mexico with the high gun control policy, but high gun crime. Japan would be in the United Kingdom. We're at the two low ends with high gun control. So the United Kingdom has 0.04 homicides with guns per 100,000, 0.18 suicides, and only 0.01 unintentional. And then here's where we come in the United States. Homicides with guns, 3.6. Suicides, 6.3. And unintentional is 0.3. Now, I list all those numbers in fairness because I think they can go both ways, depending on how you look at them.
Where'd you get the data for the unintentional? What is that?
Unintentional? Yeah. It's some of these numbers are open to interpretation.
Like an acquaintance?
These numbers are open to interpretation on how you define unintentional or homicide or suicide. The unintentional, I think the source I was looking at stated any time a gun was used without intent to kill that ended up killing someone. Like
accidents.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gun
Children playing,
misfires.
I drop a gun and it discharges.
And that was that high?
Yeah.
Where did you get that source from?
I can't remember.
What country was it high in?
The high end for unintentional, they were all below 1 for every 100,000.
Every country?
3.6 you said?
No, 0.3.
23?
0.3.
Okay.
0.3.
So unintentional are pretty low. Like in 2010, one of the statistics I found was only 606 people in this country were killed unintentionally with handguns or guns in general. But I still think that's too high. That pales in comparison to the numbers of homicides.
Well, in that circumstance, you can teach people responsible use of guns, and you will see that number drop.
Right, and that's one of the things I would like to argue for. I have two stands at gun control. I only went over my strict one. My other one, which is more of a pragmatic one, would be everyone who wants to own a gun basically has to get a license to own a gun. So it's mandatory registry of guns. Everyone has license to wants a gun has to be licensed, not just licensed to carry, but licensed to own. All guns, especially if you have children in the house, have to be locked up in a safe.
So in other words, you want me to have a gun, not be able to use my gun, and be on a list that I own a gun?
No, you can use the gun. Why
but it has to be locked up, so there's...
And you can get it out when you need to use it.
Okay, what if you need to use it now?
What do you mean now? I'm assuming you're thinking someone's breaking into your house?
Something along those lines.
Because, Mark...
We're being invaded now.
Invaded or burglar?
Isn't it the same thing? You're being invaded.
A burglar will usually leave upon being discovered or noise. In fact, one of the best deterrents
invaded by pirates, invaded by the government, invaded by police, invaded
burglars will oftentimes wait for you to not be there to break into your house.
Okay, sure. So not burglars. What if, say, the fear of the Second Amendment comes true. Our government has turned tyrannical, and you need your weapon this second because... an army's coming through your town.
How likely is that to happen?
You tell me.
I think it's very unlikely.
It's getting worse and worse out there, in my opinion.
Okay. How so?
Let's see here. Homicides by police have gone up extremely higher in the last few years.
Okay, that's police. Is that government mandated?
Police is not government mandated, but tell me.
So you're just talking about
how many
cops.
How many large cities do not have police?
I think all large cities have police forces.
Exactly.
Large and small.
And they're just getting more and more powerful. They're getting more and more tanks. That kind of crap, dude.
They are being outfitted with more and more assault weapons.
Way more weapons than we do.
Okay. But I think that's any police force. You name the country, and they're going to have more weapons than you. Even the United Kingdom, where they don't carry guns on their person, they still have batons, mace, non-lethal weapons, more than any average citizen.
Yeah.
This is true.
But they're not driving tanks around.
No, I think what you're confusing. You're confusing like government takeover with just bad cops.
They are a government agency.
Right. And I'm a government employee. If I start poisoning people's food, does that mean I'm acting in the name of the government, or am I just being an asshole?
Probably just being an asshole.
Right. And if
However,
a cop decides to hit you with his baton and he tries to justify it saying you were resisting arrest, and he discharges a firearm at you, is that the government saying he was okay to do that? Or is that the government...
Who polices the police?
I don't know. Government
No,
oversight.
we need
the
a
police
well-controlled
police
militia,
the
man.
police.
Right. So we're talking about police policy that we need to...
Well, the people. I mean, the people. You know, if police are getting out of hand, there's always an uproar amongst the
Right.
people. I mean, we live in a democracy. You know, I mean, they're not.
There's always an
They don't-
uproar,
they
but
don't-
typically they're squashed because I don't know why. But the police, however, are investigated and policed by the police themselves. There's the Internal Affairs Department, and nobody else will do investigations upon police.
Okay.
Police misuse of violence, misuse of
And you
excessive
don't
force.
And you don't think that's going to turn around and bite you in the ass if you decide to fight the police with force?
Initially, yes, it will bite me in the ass if I decide to shoot a police officer.
Right.
I don't think that it's a good thing to fight
So
a
how does
police
this-
officer.
so-
I'm not saying go shoot police officers.
But you're the
we
one
just
saying
want
you
our
needed the
guns to
gun.
give
I'm
them a
saying I
shot.
want
I'm
to
gonna
be
edit
as well
that. I'm gonna
armed
edit
as
that later.
police officers.
You said you needed the gun right away, and it couldn't be locked
That
up
was
at a
for a
safe.
burglary situation.
in
That's
this
different.
circumstance.
If we see an uprising, we're going to be able to get the gun out of our safe if we need to.
Okay, so why is the safe option not
Because
palatable
we
to
were
you?
talking about burglars before.
Yeah, and I
you,
told
you
you-
don't want to have to lock up your gun if you're in fear of the government or a burglar.
I don't want it to be mandated.
If somebody's
going
to
to
kick down my door, I want my gun ready.
It shouldn't be mandated to be locked up. Is ultimately my main point.
Why?
It is a wise decision to lock it up if you have
Wait,
children
because
present.
of burglars.
But Chris, how often is a burglar going to not run away when he hears a noise? Lots of times dogs keep burglars away. Burglars tend to wait for signs like you're not there, like your car's gone. Newspaper stuck up in the driveway. That's why you always ask your neighbor to remove your newspaper from the
Well, I
driveway.
think there are social studies that back up that there have been a lot of crimes that have been deterred by home gun ownership and having a gun readily available.
Where?
I don't know. Do you want me to look it up?
Because I saw one little study where they asked convicts, people in prison already, what deterred them from breaking into a house or committing a crime. And they often said number one reason was they were afraid the person might have a gun. But if you ask rapists the same thing, like why did you decide to rape her, oftentimes they justify saying she was asking for it. Why should we trust convicts who are trying to rationalize their poor decision-making abilities? Did the gun really deter them? How did they know they had a gun? Oftentimes they don't.
Well, it's because we have such a dense population of gun ownership. Almost 44% of people here in the United States have guns. You're flipping a coin. That's what protects us.
That doesn't make me feel safer though.
Right.
In general, I mean, we live in a very safe community here in Fort Collins. I'm not afraid to go walking downtown at night.
Yeah, so it specifically might not apply to a situation like here, but if you look at Detroit and the amount of burglars or the amount of aggressive violence that is occurring there, you might want to have a gun readily available.
That's just because they have guns already, though. I mean, it's
Plenty of people here
it's
have
a
guns,
slippery.
too.
It's slippery. I'm talking about. I mean, that it may make sense, but if there was gun control, or where if they instituted a handgun ban in Detroit or in Chicago, like they tried to do, and it was unanimous decision amongst the
Right.
city council of Chicago to institute a handgun ban, that might have it should decrease.
Did it
gun
actually
violence.
help? Did it actually help?
They never. I don't think they even instituted it.
They
because it was
have
decided
banned all
it was-
drugs too, just so you know,
it was
and
decided
it hasn't made it any more difficult to find drugs.
If we're going to go down that line of argument, Mark, then we're going to say, I'm going to just go out and say it right out. We've outlawed murder, but people still murder. So we shouldn't.
That's my
So
point
we
with-
shouldn't allow. We outlaw murder.
you're right.
Murder should be legal.
No, I'm not saying that murder should be legal. I'm saying
I think you did by your own line of thought.
He's just saying it doesn't curb anything.
it doesn't stop the violence. It
Nothing
doesn't.
100% or by a modicum.
It will not stop the violence. If somebody's going to kill somebody and a gun is not available, they're going to find a way to kill somebody.
And
Right,
a lot
but
of a lot of situations, yes, but I think I think it's really analogous to like suicide nets. You know, they say that. I mean, if talking about people committing suicide off, you know, the Brooklyn Bridge or whatever it was in New York, one of the bridges in New York, and they, you know, one of the ideas was to put a net under the bridge, and people said that's stupid. If someone's going to kill themselves, they're going to do it. But what they found is when they had the net, that it did decrease suicide.
Right.
Off the bridge.
Yeah.
And
But
there's-
no,
You can keep going
totally.
with that,
Yeah.
Keep going with that.
Like, so, I mean, it decreased suicides, you know, all over the map. It didn't just decrease it over the bridge. It
The
was
total
all,
statistic.
the total statistics,
of
yeah.
suicide.
And what's
Yeah.
actually funny is there's another
Suicide.
bridge right across the street within
Right.
eye view, and nobody thought about going over there. So
Yeah.
what happens is like you have that immediate effect of wanting to jump off that bridge and kill yourself. But when there's a deterrent there, you're gonna think differently for just a split second, and it's gonna curb your attitude.
Right.
That's
So that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying about guns. It's like I think guns are just the easiest way to kill somebody or yourself.
right.
There's that argument too with decreasing suicides. Guns are just way too easy to kill somebody
Yeah,
with.
there's
They seem overwhelmingly powerful, and I
Yeah.
think if that's not available, somebody's not going to be like, all right, I'm going to go. Like, it takes a lot more effort to kill someone with a knife or with like a bomb or something. You know, I mean, I think that's my main argument for gun control.
It's a physical. It's not just a physical ease to pull the trigger versus stab someone, but also a psychological leap you have to take with a knife. You're in their personal space. It's personal. You're touching them. A gun, you're disconnected. You're removed from them. It's easier to pull that trigger psychologically as well.
And if you look
I
at
won't argue with that.
if you look at the homicide rates amongst countries, right, with like gun violence rates, or no, just like the overall homicide rate in countries with strict gun control, like the UK and Australia, the countries that we should be comparing ourselves to, advanced industrialized nations, and they're all very much lower than us, which I would say would be.
But after the
expected.
1997 gun ban, there was an increase in homicide rates across the board. In fact, handgun violence went up like 4 times over 4 years after the ban.
But
up
still
until
much
2000.
lower than ours. I mean, I guess
It's still
that's
much
the-
lower, but it didn't seem to have a cause and effect situation. It didn't seem like it was the cause of banning handguns made any difference. In fact, it made it look like maybe just as the population grew a little bit, that domestic homicides there increased overall.
I think in Australia, homicide rates decreased at least somewhat after they instituted their gun ban and buyback program, which I think was in 1985 or 1990 something.
Actually, I have the notes right here. Let me check.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't see how a handgun ban in a city wouldn't help, assuming
Okay.
that you were
Because there's a
had to do
higher
it, like,
demand
state
for illegal
ways.
guns.
And you're saying because like
If you just do it in one city, what's to stop them from coming in from another city?
well, yeah, that's the problem with the Second Amendment in my mind. I mean, it seems like if a city or a state wants to ban handguns, they should be able to do that. You
But
know,
also the problem though is without it
or the
being
whole nation for that matter.
nationwide,
That's-
people are just going to go to the next state. It's like fireworks.
Right.
What are we going to do
Fireworks-
with 300 million guns, though?
You could have a
After
buyback
we-
program. I mean, that's
Recycle.
Recycle them? Okay, but what about the people that are not going to get rid of them? Those are going to
but
be
they're
the
always
violent
going to be
offenders
out there.
Okay, well here's my thing. So Australia, when you mentioned the gun buyback, for people to avoid prosecution for owning these certain outlawed guns, they didn't outlaw them all across the board, but they outlawed I think on caliber and magazine
Right.
size.
You're correct.
This was 1996. 660,000 long guns were brought in, and 50,000 pistols in 2003. These were after different mass shootings involving those types of weapons. Now, people still kept them, but what happens is if any are used in crimes or any are found in a search for whatever reason, they are then confiscated and the person is prosecuted. So eventually you filter out those weapons throughout the population. Now, the argument I think would be, are they filtering out faster than they're being brought in illegally, or is it the other way around?
That I can't answer.
Yeah,
So
either
it's-
I couldn't find statistics on that.
So what happened with the homicide rate overall after the gun ban in Australia? Did it have a noticeable decrease overall over time?
It went
I never
down.
found any statistics on it.
Yeah, I think it went down overall, not drastically. The suicide rate did go down fairly drastically.
And that's a crazy thing because with the bridge example, suicide is a tough thing to curb, and the one time I would give up like the gun debate part would be with suicides because it's that immediate thing again. It's like jumping off that bridge. If you pull that trigger, there's no going back. If
Right.
you don't have the gun, then you're not going to be able to commit suicide.
Right.
So
Gives
the
you time to
suicide
think
rate
about
thing
it.
is pretty apparent, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like I was going to focus more on homicide in
Me
this
too. I
in this
didn't expect
in this
suicides to
talk,
come
and
up.
I still think I still think that it's an issue when you're talking about the gross numbers of people getting killed in the U.S., which is somewhere like 11,000 people per year. It's like we're fighting. They say like it's like in Vietnam War every 6 years or something.
Right.
You know,
And the
as
suicide
far
rate
as-
is even almost double that, isn't it? It's almost like 20,000 here, right?
Okay. In 2010, the exact
Yeah.
statistics were
19,000,
as far as
something
using
like
as far as
11,000
using guns.
11,000.
78 gun homicides, 19,392 suicides, and then, as I said earlier, 606 unintentional deaths. So it was
Yeah.
over 30,000 total.
Right. Most of them are
And
suicides.
the majority of them are suicides.
Right.
Yeah.
So we need to have better training. We need to have. Unfortunately, we might have to have guns locked up to prevent suicides, and we have to have them in responsible people's arms. But I mean, is that really going to stop somebody from killing themselves?
No,
I think it will. Yes.
I don't think it'll stop anybody from doing it.
Well,
Once
okay,
somebody's
let's-
made up their
unfortunately,
mind.
Let's talk about what is like it's almost insane though the lack of gun control in this country though. I mean, you don't have to have your gun registered. Is that what you're saying? Like you don't.
There are certain states where you don't have to have your gun registered at all.
That's insane. That's insane. Why
That's
would you not?
unfortunate.
I wouldn't like.
So-
there's logical steps that we can take, like small steps that we should take. I feel like every gun should be registered.
So in Finland, for example, you can get a gun, and you have to have it registered. You have to renew your gun license or registration every 5 years. And if you commit a crime, like I don't even know like what degree of crime it has to be, but if you committed like a certain degree of crime, they take your gun away. And they've got like I don't know, a 69 out of every 100 people have a gun there, and they only had like 14 homicides in 2010. Those are staggering statistics. A little bit of regulation is a good thing. Removing the Second Amendment might not be.
Don't get me
necessary.
wrong here as far as gun control goes. There are certain cases where people should not be allowed to own guns.
Right.
Violent felons should not be allowed to own
Right.
guns. I believe domestic abusers should not be allowed to own guns.
Yeah, that's a good one.
There's certain points where people should not be allowed to own guns, but in any other point with society, if it is your right to own a gun.
You know the funny thing about Finland too, if you're trying to get a gun, you can't use the self-defense argument as a reason for getting the gun. It has to have like a different reason besides self-defense. So it's just kind of crazy because
That's odd.
we have so many people here claiming self-defense for their guns, and in
Not
Finland,
just for the guns, but for shooting people too.
yeah, just shooting people. What do you mean?
Trayvon Martin,
Well,
George Zimmerman, I shot him in self-defense. The stand your ground argument that Alec has forced, well, not forced, but coerced state governments into passing
yeah,
stand your ground laws,
I don't know a whole
castle
lot about
doctrines.
that case.
Which case?
The Zimzam. George
Oh,
Zimmerman?
George Zimmerman.
Right.
How did that come up? What are we saying?
I don't know why that was coming up.
Oh,
It was a
Just like a
specific
fake,
When you
a
said-
fake
when you said-
Institute of Self-Defense.
okay.
Like
it was my
just
little
using
snide
how-
remark when you said
Oh,
people using the self-defense argument to get a gun, and I said also to shoot people.
right.
The stand your ground argument.
Gotcha.
Oh, okay.
Also to get away with murder.
Right.
That's another
Because after that there's
use of the self-defense.
I'm not sure if there's an uptick in the use of it, but there was an uptick of reporting on stand your ground
Well,
arguments.
maybe we need to change the laws on that kind of stuff so people
Right.
like George Zimmerman get locked up instead of go ahead and just murder some poor little kid.
Yeah.
There's plenty of instances in our state, the state of Colorado, where the Make My Day law, however, has been used and used correctly. So
Yeah.
there's
You're talking about someone invading your home, right? That's
Yes,
the Make
and
My
we-
Day
we
law,
were-
and you
we
have
were-
the
we-
right to shoot them. No
we were
matter
talking
what.
about burglaries earlier briefly, and there are plenty of instances where it doesn't necessarily deter somebody. If you say they're trespassing, that's the only thing that you need to do before shooting them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't get me wrong. If they're running away and you shoot them in the back, you can still be prosecuted for it. That's one of the things they do take into account. Somebody is running away and you shoot at them, that you're shooting somebody in the back. That's wrong. But there are other instances where a gun does not deter somebody, or just people being present does not deter somebody from robbing a house. Just in Fort Collins, I'm not sure how many years back it was, but it was an acquaintance of mine was being robbed. His upstairs neighbors had been robbed first. The actual person doing the robbery brought one of his neighbors downstairs with a gun at his back to his front door He went around out the window with his 20-gauge shotgun and shot the guy in the back. That deterred him from robbing him.
See, there's an example of guns saving people.
Well, yeah.
Innocent.
You're always going to find you're always going to find the anecdotal argument of why the guns are good, why guns are bad, but why do the good outweigh the bad? One little statistic I found from a study was that, now granted, it's hard to justify this one way or the other, because oftentimes the argument is guns used in self-defense are not often reported, or statistics are not accurately kept because they're not crimes. Like, someone tries to mug me in an alley, I pull a gun out because they have a knife. Or there's someone outside breaking into or hadn't broken into my house yet, but I went out on my porch with my shotgun. Or there's a riot outside my door, and I, to keep my car safe, I decided to sit on my porch, which I've heard from a friend personally, sat out on my porch with a shotgun to make sure those rioters didn't do damage to my property. Those statistics are not often widely kept or accurately reported. So it's hard to justify this study, but they said, based on what they knew and how many times guns were used in self-defense in a single year, it was 4 to 13 times more likely the gun was used for criminal use, suicide, or unintentionally shooting someone versus the use of self-defense. It was depending on the state. I think California was highest. So guns were only used one time versus 13 times.
Probably somewhat seldom. And I mean, if my whole problem is, and maybe this is somewhat naive, I don't know, but in my mind, it's like, if the criminals have a really hard time getting a hold of a gun, then you don't need a gun for self-defense. I mean, and I can anticipate someone saying criminals are always going to get a hold of guns, but I mean, if we could make it a lot harder,
right?
It's not like we couldn't make it harder.
It would be very difficult for you to go find an illegal gun, because you're not immersed into that criminal underground.
Right.
Somebody who is immersed in that criminal underground would know exactly where to go for a gun.
You can get them off Craigslist sometimes.
Well,
I've seen
now.
posted on Craigslist.
And in the state of Colorado, you do not need to register a sale of a gun. I can sell you a gun without there being a record of it.
Really? See, that's another
Pass a little
example.
legislation. Maybe we can get this worked out.
However, if you are a felon, I sell you a gun, and you commit a violent crime, I'm just as guilty for it as you are.
Right. Yeah, I mean, well,
there is responsibility being held.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems it just seems like if we really criminalized owning a gun, then it would create a huge disincentive for people, even criminals. What do you get if in the UK if you are caught with a gun that's not legal, if you don't have a license for it? I mean,
Ooh,
it's
that's a good
probably
question.
pretty
Is it
probably pretty strict
law, I would imagine, huh?
I don't know, probably minimum fine, but your gun's getting taken away.
Yeah.
I do know. I think in the UK, if your gun's not locked up, now this is the difference between America and the UK. Cops are allowed to come into your house if they know you're a gun owner. I'm pretty sure, to see
Warrantless.
to
That's
check
violating
to make
two
sure
amendments.
to check to make sure it's locked up. And that's the thing, is why I bring that up about the United States, is that's strictly in our amendments, and I don't think that was ever going to be overturned. I don't think the Second Amendment is going to be overturned either, but I would argue to keep the illegal search and seizure one. But I would argue to overturn the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
But again, it's like we have two amendments blocking this.
Yeah.
One would be the fact that we have the Second Amendment, so we can't really necessitate taking away people's guns, even if they're maybe not properly locked up. Probably the best we could do in a judicial court without it being overruled would be fine the person for not locking up your guns. The other thing is, how would we even find it? Because unless it was probable cause, or they're on another call, or they were invited in, you can't just walk into someone's house and say, "Hey, are your guns locked up?" Oh, wait, they're not.
Right. Yeah. That's a tough one to enforce, I guess.
Now, besides it being tough to enforce, and there's always going to be a black market and people not doing it, why should we not try to pursue gun control? Because I don't like the arguments where someone's saying it's just too hard to do. Why bother? People aren't always going to follow it. Why bother? Because then we come back to all those other arguments, like people are still going to murder. Why bother?
Right.
My favorite, I think, is alcohol and drunk driving. Like, we still have over 10,000 deaths a year from drunk driving accidents, but we have over 1.5 million people being arrested every year for drunk driving.
Right. That's gone down a lot, though, hasn't it?
The drunk driving deaths have gone down. The arrests have gone up.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
But it's been illegal to drive drunk the entire time.
Right, but they've made it a lot.
They've enforced it more.
They've increased the penalties
That's crime
by a
prevention.
lot.
So
Yeah,
you're trying to increase the bureaucracy that already is our police force?
Maybe.
That's
But
a
there's the other
different
thing.
issue.
And then this goes the other way. This also cuts the other way too. When you talk about alcohol in the DEA, or not alcohol, drugs in the DEA, you spend X number of dollars, you get Y number of drugs. But if you multiply the X spending on drug enforcement, like you multiply it by 2 or 3 or 4, you get diminishing returns on the amount of drugs you get back off the streets. You're never going to get them all. So where you draw the line in terms of enforcement, getting these people versus you're not getting returns on your money that you're investing in this, and the fact also you're giving these people more power. So I think this is where Mark and I draw a different line in the sand here.
How so?
Your line. I'm drawing my line at we should throw a lot of money and a lot of time at getting guns off the streets. You're saying it's not worth the effort in terms of money, time, investment, and there's probably other ways to diminish gun violence. And you're drawing the line closer to being allowed to own guns versus investment trying to solve this problem this way.
So if we're going to solve
Not saying you're not
I don't think that
against
taking guns away is going to solve the problem. Is ultimately what I'm saying.
right.
You're correct. And I don't think that increasing the police state is going to effectively take away the gun violence. It's just not going to happen as far as I'm concerned. All you're going to do is see an increase in illegal searches and seizures. You're going to see an increase in people's rights being violated. It's just not worth the time and effort, as far as I'm concerned. There, throwing the extra money at a police force.
does a gun ever dissuade a cop from an illegal search and seizure? I mean, would any of us who would pull a gun on a cop? They would just shoot you. I feel like.
Yeah,
I'm thinking Waco right now.
Well, I'm thinking any time, a cop shoots somebody without a gun and they say that he was reaching for a gun or something. I mean, I don't see how that would be.
Yeah,
How that would stop an illegal search and seizure.
Well,
I mean,
I'm not saying having a gun is going to stop an illegal search and seizure.
So where are the majority of gun homicides actually happening in this country? I think that's an important
Chicago.
question.
No, that's I don't believe so.
I think it's New Orleans #1, Detroit. I'm pretty sure Chicago's up there just because I would guess the reason is because there's a lot of poverty in these areas.
Yeah.
And poverty seems to breed crime. I think that's an easier issue to address rather than trying to go after however many guns we have.
I had recently seen some statistics that were surprising that said that not just gun violent crimes, but violent crimes in particular, were not the big three that you're thinking of. Not New Orleans, not Chicago. It was something along the lines of Alaska being one of the most violent crimes per capita.
Oh, it's probably per capita, yeah.
It's because everybody owns a gun up there. I mean, that helps our argument, if anything. I mean, probably Texas, Alaska.
And how many of those are suicides?
But
'Cause
also
Wyoming has
a
the
lot
same
of them.
effect.
But
Probably
They have the
you're
highest
but you're
suicide
also
rate in
looking
the
at not
nation.
necessarily how many people own guns, but there's also a higher gang rate in Alaska.
Did not know that.
Yep, the gang rate and gang violence per capita is higher. There's other things that contribute to those factors.
But back to Chris's point, I don't think poverty is such, an easy issue, is it? I mean, isn't poverty a very difficult issue, especially in those areas? How long has Detroit been going through poverty? I mean, how long have minorities,
it's mostly
especially
minorities.
African Americans, been struggling with poverty and crime?
Hey, don't put out poor white people here and their meth.
Well, yeah, whatever. But I mean, socioeconomically, I feel like it's hard to.
I think
That's a hard cycle to
We're
break.
starting to finally do some things to address some of the issues there. I think if you finish K through 12 now in Detroit, you'll be able to go to university for free.
Good.
I think that's really going to bring them out of a lot of things, and that's
Good.
I think that's a simple way to start solving some problems. Get education reform under control. I mean, we should be focused on that more than gun violence. I think.
Yeah,
Look
I don't
at
know.
Some
I
of
mean,
these inner
that's
cities, man. I mean, these inner cities have been crushed for the last 3 decades.
right.
And these are big metro areas, and there's going to be a lot of gun violence as a result.
Yeah, I still think it's absurd how many guns commit murders every year. I mean,
My
still
point
think
is there's going to be a lot of violence regardless in a city like that, whether it's guns or not. You take the guns out of the factor, it being a city like that, there's going to be violence regardless.
Perhaps. I mean, you could say, what's the next step then? Knives? I mean, I can't imagine it's just not as easy to kill someone with a knife as it is with a gun. You know, I mean, I think the argument that it's hard to get rid of the guns. I mean, there might be something to that, but I mean, I think like John was saying, we should at least try. In the places where they're rife with gang gun violence, you know. That's my position.
There's still going to be plenty of violence with or without the guns. It's not going to curtail that at all.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like we're starting to repeat ourselves. So,
Well, at least we covered all the issues, and me and Mark finally won a debate.
That's my argument. I like that. You want some
okay,
Chris?
well, anyway,
Yeah.
let's go around
You
and
won?
closing arguments.
Yeah, that's
Chris.
my closing argument. I already gave it.
Well, I guess my closing argument would be that the data seems to suggest that even if you have in trying to enforce gun laws, actually it doesn't seem to curb the homicide rate, and it'd be easier to address other socioeconomic issues.
I would say that it's a public health issue. I mean, it's 11,000 people being killed. That I feel like could be, if we had a reasonable culture in this society where we didn't have this holy Second Amendment that people seem to think was given to us by God, and we can't change it. It's a needless, unnecessary amendment, and I think if we had sensible gun control, we could see a lot less deaths and a lot less violence.
Second Amendment was not given to us by God. It was given to us by our government to protect us from our government. It is also given to us from the government who defended itself against another tyrannical government. My stance still stays the same, regardless of your guys' points. No matter what, I do believe that guns still should stay in our hands. For that matter, completely. Self-defense is more broad than just burglaries.
All right.
Okay. Well, as for my thoughts, I do agree with you, AJ, that it is a public health issue. We oftentimes use public health as a way to change things in this country. Sometimes it cuts the other way, though. Like Occupy movements. Occupy in New York and Washington, D.C. were both shut down due to public health issues in terms of sanitation, garbage, and all that. So it cuts both ways, but I think in this case it would cut the right way, that there are people dying from guns, and if we just stop using the guns, I think you're going to see a dramatic decrease in homicides just because there's going to be fewer deaths from to put a gun to your face and pull the trigger versus I have to approach you, close the gap, and start slashing at you with a knife. And even then, unless I stab you in the brain or right in the heart, you're probably going to come out all right versus I can keep pulling the trigger until that clip's empty. I think we are allowed and we should repeal amendments that aren't working. Sometimes they're passed in a time and a place, and oftentimes that time and place is passed. I'm not saying the founding fathers should have recognized the use of automatic weaponry, but it was definitely in that time and in that culture that they saw a need for guns, especially when you're living on the frontier, and you just fought a war. But also, being a sort of a history buff myself, there are other nations that did gain their independence without going to war with Britain. You had India with their sort of
peaceful,
nonviolent protests to eventually get England to leave. Australia and Canada both. So I think they're both part of the Commonwealth still, but they have pretty much full autonomy in terms of how they rule themselves. So it didn't need to be through violent revolution and gun ownership.
How many people died in their nonviolent revolution?
India?
Yeah.
A lot, but you hold the moral high ground.
Okay.
A lot of people.
Just checking.
A lot of people also died in the revolution. It was just on both sides.
I don't want to die for my moral high ground necessarily.
Yeah, don't tread on us, dude.
All right then. As you can see, we got two people willing to die for their cause, and as long as they have a gun in their hands, and I'm willing to die for my cause as long as I hold the moral high ground. I think that's it with the Plunge Cast. I hope you have a great day. If you have any issues with our discussion, please listen in the comments.